All right, so we're here with Ellen. We're going to have a little chat with her today. Ellen is a lesbian. In California is where she lives. You okay with California?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's some other Ellens living here.
Just I'm making sure some people like to be real, Anyways,
Okay.
you want to give us just a brief introduction and then we'll jump into a chat.
Yes, hello, everyone. My name is Ellen. I've lived in San Francisco since, the early '80s, and, and I came out earlier than that, but I've lived here since the 1980s, and I've been involved in the lesbian community, obviously, and now I'm involved with, a a gender critical group here in the city where I live, and we've been doing a lot of activism.
And so have you always been an activist? Even going way back?
Um, Not a big important one. I'm just a little grunty activist. I'll just I mean, I'll help out with various causes. I've done animal rights work, done a lot of animal rights work, and this issue, to be honest, I didn't know a lot about it until, um, just about a year ago, a friend of mine introduced me to it, but I have had experiences in the, in the '80s and in the '90s, which, Carol wanted to ask me about today.
Did Were you active in any of the gay rights movement, gay liberation, or anything like that?
Not a whole lot, I would march, I would,
Mhm.
not in a big way.
Do you have any like feminist background? Were you involved with any of the feminist stuff back in the day?
I did when I in the city where I came from, but not a whole lot. I was just more of an act. I mean, I'm not a big mover and shaker type. I would just go and do. I would go to protests and I would support people emotionally and that kind of thing. Nothing really important.
So you basically could consider yourself pretty average woman, just living your life,
Yeah,
right?
I think I'm just pretty average.
Okay. So you said that you got involved in some gender critical activism and um what made you start to get involved in this particular kind of activism?
And this kind of activism, what really got me, well, I did have a couple of experiences in the '80s,
Okay.
and they always just kinda stuck in my mind that, "No, this just isn't right, this isn't right." And then I happened to be having dinner with a friend of mine who lucky woman, she lives in Portland right now, and she, she said, "Hey, Pat, have you ever heard of TERFs?" I said, "No, what is a TERF?" And she told me and she explained it. I said, "Oh my God, that makes perfect sense to me." So I spent last summer just inhaling every book I could find about this subject. And so
Was she telling you about turfs in like a negative way? Was she
no, in
saying
a
like,
very positive
oh,
way,
okay,
very
okay.
positive. No, she's totally, no, she's on our side. So she was
No.
telling me about TERFs in a very positive way. And I thought, oh yeah, I'm all for that. And I've never been a politically correct type. There are people who are very politically correct, and they're just so dang self-righteous. I just never really liked them very much.
No, I mean, I'm the same. I just
Yeah,
think,
they just
look,
get on my nerves, like, come on. I mean, I went to Catholic schools, I've seen holier than thou, and these people are holier than thou.
yeah. So okay, you said you had some experiences in the 80s. I want to hear about some of those
Oh,
experiences.
yes, they're
Tell me.
quite entertaining, they're very entertaining. Did you have your popcorn ready?
Okay, okay.
Okay, so you have the popcorn ready. Okay, well, the first one was when I was in the '80s. I got very interested. I love history, and I got very interested in goddess worship, like the ancient goddess religions and pagan religions. And I thought this is just really fascinating. And I joined a coven, and the coven is a women's coven, and there's about eight of us, and they're a nice group of women. But one day we got someone who wanted to join, and how it was advertised was through the newspaper in Coming Up newspaper, which is in San Francisco. And so we joined so that's how we hooked up, that's how people hooked up back then, and it was a nice group, we'd get together, and we would talk about pagan theory, goddess history, and we talked
Was
about the books that we read.
was it all just lesbians, or was it just
Yeah,
the
it was, mostly lesbians, but there were some straight women,
okay.
and, there's a large pagan community here, um but anyway, so this one person wanted to join, and he was a male to female transsexual, what they were called back then, and we felt kind of awkward, but we let him in, and long story short, he just proceeded to take over, he wanted it to be all about him, and he was just all about him, and finally, we booted him out, and he was very unhappy about this, and we explained to him, "We can't have you in our group because you just take up way too much energy. You're and you want it all about yourself, and it's not about you. We have a goal here, and it's not to be supporting you." And he didn't like that at all. He said that we were all transphobic, and that was the first time I ever heard that word.
Oh, so that was being used all the way back then?
Yeah, I think he said transphobic. I think he said that. Maybe, he but it certainly meant that.
Okay.
And he, and so he went away, and we were very relieved, and then later on, I there's a bathhouse, a women's bathhouse in San Francisco called Osento, and I went and we all the lesbians used to go to Osento, and it was started by a lesbian, and it was kind of a nice place, and it was in an old Victorian, it was just kind of funky, and I was in there once, and I'm sitting there in the big hot tub, and I look over, and damn, there is him. He had come to Osento, and he's sitting there now he's post-op, and he's sitting there checking out all the women, and he said, nice," and I thought, "Oh my god, I gotta get out of here." The last thing I wanted was for him to recognize me, definitely not in the buff,
Oh
and
my
so I
god.
kinda slithered out, like, "Ew," and I went and complained, and I found out and then a few years later, Ocento closed, but I found out at there was a WDI conference in September last September, and I went to that, and I found out that the reason it closed is because the owner did not want to be admitting men, and back then they and apparently there was a policy, city policy that if if a man is had his had, quote, "the surgery," he can be allowed in women's spaces, and the woman who ran Osento, her name was Summer, said, "No, I'm not having that, it's time for me to retire," and so she closed Osento.
Oh, wow. See,
So
that's
that was
interesting. I didn't know
yeah,
that they, which I mean, I'm not surprised, but
yeah,
it's interesting to know that the city already had
yeah,
stepped on women's rights, you know?
yeah, yeah, I think from what I've read, like, women's rights have been getting stepped on for quite a while in this regard.
Yeah.
There's an interesting book, I recommend it to everyone. It's by a woman named Ruth Barrett, and it's a compilation of all these essays. And Ruth Barrett is a Dianic witch, and she wrote this book in 2015, and everything it's all accurate. It's all valid today. And so she covers all these different stories, all these different aspects of why this movement is so harmful for women.
Oh,
I
that's
for ex
interesting. I'm on the mailing list for their events and things like that.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I know who you're talking about, and yeah, I didn't. I should look into her books. I should read that.
You should definitely look into her book. Just fast it's like all these women wrote essays for it. For example, she had one story in there, and it was about a young woman who was about 15 or so, and she thought she was a man, She was a young lesbian, but and she was this young butch lesbian, and because she had no butch role models in her life, she thought she was a man, and somehow somebody had said, "Oh, there's this women's music festival you might wanna go to." And so she goes to Michigan to the Women's Music Festival, and for the first time in her life, she saw all these lesbians who were actually really perfectly pleased with being lesbians, and they're perfectly proud of their bodies, and it was this big light bulb moment for her, and she decided, "Whoa, I'm not gonna trans. This is where I'll be," and so but we've lost that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's also there was also a huge generational divide there too.
Yeah.
You know, my generation, which I was born in 1980, so I would have been a young woman, late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
Uh, we were very we didn't want anything to do with the hippie ladies,
I
the
don't
all
blame
the
you.
hippie stuff, and so
I don't blame you.
it wasn't likely that we were going to go to things like that because we perceived it, at least in with the groups I ran in, as like, weird hippie stuff. Like you didn't want to
I don't blame you.
which is it's unfortunate though because
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
know.
I guess when you're young you don't have an open mind as you think you do. Like I have a
No,
much
you
more
don't.
open mind now than I did when I was like 19.
Yeah, when you're young, we're actually a lot more conservative than we really than we realize.
Yeah, but I wish I would have actually, in hindsight, thinking about women only events and spaces, especially,
Mhm.
Michigan Women's Festival and the stories I've heard, I think it would have been very helpful for me to have gone,
Yeah. Yeah,
actually.
I think I've always thought women's spaces were so interesting. I My mother went to a girls' school, a boarding school that her great aunt started, and we think my great aunt was a lesbian, and she, and the girls were all they all had self-confidence, they could they it was it's just when I think about this school, the girls had self-confidence, they could all speak up if they wanted to, and they didn't go through the weird nonsense that I went to when I went to school because I didn't have that privilege. We were considerably poor by the time I was a child,
Yeah.
by the time I was born, and I went to this public school, and, the boys were always on top of things, the boys could run things, and this school wasn't like that at all, and my grandmother used to go around giving talks about why it's important for girls to have an education,
Hmm.
and it was and these are all very feminist messages that women certainly weren't getting in the 1930s and 40s and 50s.
Yeah. No, I've heard from other women who've gone to all girls schools or colleges or
Mhm.
whatever that it's just such a unique and great environment to be in. It's such a
Oh, yeah.
interesting environment to have no males there, you know?
Oh, yeah, yeah, and this school was also a really beautiful school. It had really beautiful architecture, and it was this Tudor Revival architect and gardens. It looked like a big fairy garden.
So when did you move to San Francisco? What year?
I moved here in, '82.
And what was the
You
reason?
were a little wee one.
I was, yes, I was
You
just a baby.
you're just a little baby. And, yeah, no, I moved here. My parents had moved here,
Okay.
and they said, "Oh, you must move here. Much better job opportunities here." So
Okay.
I moved here, and because 'cause we're going through a terrible recession back east.
Okay. And did you find San Francisco a much better environment to be a lesbian in at that
Um,
time?
oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because I've heard that, and I even when I first came out, it was a lot of times we would go up to San Francisco to go to clubs and stuff because you just had a lot more to do that you just didn't have in your
We
hometown.
don't have that anymore.
I know.
Like, all the clubs have gone away, all the bookstores have gone away. We had bookstores, we had I mean, they've all gone away.
Yeah, I
And
think
w
we went to me and my wife were at my girlfriend at the time.
yeah.
We went to Pride in San Francisco in 2001,
Yeah.
and, it was kinda magical in a way, you know?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Didn't
Not
really see
anymore.
anything that I'm sure I would see now.
Yeah, not anymore. Um, yeah, my next experience was in it was in the early '90s, like around 94, 95, and there is a group of women, they wanted to start a little, uh, city community called the Whiptail Lizard Lounge, and, uh and I remember, like, bless their hearts, they actually were able to get a place in the Castro, and they actually could afford to pay the rent for about a couple of years, and that wouldn't happen now,
Yeah.
and they, and sure enough, we had 2 male to female trans transgender people, transgender men who came to the Whiptail Lizard Lounge, and it just changed the whole energy.
Yeah. Was this supposed to be a women's only or lesbian only
Yeah.
bar, club
It
type of
it
thing?
it was supposed to be just like a little community gathering center. It's like a women's only gathering center, but it's
And and
mostly lesbians.
and they
It was
specified women only?
yeah. So
And
guess who came? They saw
and
women only, that's us. You're not
that's me.
welcome. We'll be there.
And
We're
so
on it.
when these guys showed up, what happened? What did they do?
Everyone was just polite about it, but I didn't like it, but I was I wish I'd been more vocal. But I mean, they would talk about there being women, and I was talking to some of the other women about this afterwards, and I said, "They're not women, they're men." "Oh, no, Pat, they're men, they're women." I said, "No, they're men. Look, Tasha's built like a linebacker. Come on." And they were both men. They're both living off of our taxes. They didn't have jobs. And they're totally self-absorbed. I mean, I'm not saying that they're all like this, just that these 2 characters were. They're totally self-absorbed, they felt they were owed a living, and after a while, the Whiptail Lizard Lounge folded because we couldn't afford the rent, so it just kind of went away, but it did make a pall on the place because it was like this male energy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If there's a group of women and a guy comes in the room, changes the whole damn atmosphere.
Yeah, it did, yeah,
Absolutely does. Yeah.
so these 2 guys, I mean, built like linebackers, it totally changed the atmosphere, but I think a lot of women back then, um, they're kinda like, "Well, okay, how are we supposed to handle this?" And it just goes along with how women are traditionally raised, that we are always raised to be polite,
Mhm.
and if you say, "No, you're not a man, I mean, you're not a woman, you're a man," you're just considered this really bad thing, and even women who consider themselves radical lesbians, uh, had that drilled into them.
Yeah. Did you find that you were that a lot of the lesbians were supportive of this, or they just wouldn't say anything
They
back then?
wouldn't say anything, they just
Yeah.
felt awkward saying anything.
And how have you seen it change over the years?
Not a whole lot, I know of a lot of lesbians who just go along with it, they say, "Oh, but we must be supportive." I was talking to one at a lesbian gathering a few months ago, and she was saying we were talking about men. I said, "What do you think about men going into women's prisons?" "Oh, but they we need to." It's very complicated. Whenever they start off with it's very complicated, you know that they're going to say the wrong thing, and sure enough, she did. And I said, "Well, 33% of them are registered sex offenders." And you think it's fine for them to share a cell with a woman. "Oh, well, it's just very complicated. I don't know if that's true." That comes from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. That's data from there. I don't think it's an I don't think it's a
Yeah,
biased data.
and men are the prison system is the most of the men in prison are there for violent offenses. It's not the
Yes,
same for women. Most women are not there for violent
exactly.
offenses. So,
Exactly. Most women are in there for offenses that are not violent. And and it's changing is changing the statistics on how, quote, women commit crimes and saying, "Oh, all of a sudden there's a peak in women, a spike in women committing crimes." Well, those aren't women; those are men
Yeah.
pretending to be women. After the Whiptail Lizard Lounge folded, oh, one of them glommed on to me, and I can't believe this. I yeah, he had 2 kids, and I used to think, "Oh my god, these kids are being brought up with the worst values." And, um, and one day he wanted a handout, and he called and wanted to borrow some money off of me, and I called back. I was really happy I only got his voicemail. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't because I just had to pay a very large tax bill." And then I didn't re he got the clue, and I never heard back from him.
Jesus.
I thought, "You're pushing me to be a Republican."
It's funny that, you say you were talking about how, the men you came across,
Mhm.
were very self-absorbed and
Yeah.
I would say narcissistic,
Yeah, they were
right?
narcissists. Yes, that's
Um,
it exactly.
and then you say, maybe not, I'm not saying all of them are. The funny thing is every story I've heard, yes, they are. Like,
Yeah,
you
I'm
know,
trying to think if I've ever met one that wasn't, and I honestly I cannot think of ever
did you
meeting one who
did
was
you ever meet
not.
or know any of the transsexuals that were gay men who transitioned?
No, I don't think so. I don't think
Okay.
I did
So
because
you
I pretty much stayed away from them. I
I
did
was gonna wonder.
okay, now in all fairness, I there was one who had a job. I thought, "Okay, you're not living off my taxes. Okay, that's something, but you're still a nut."
There you go. See
And
what you're gonna do.
but really, honestly, I cannot think of any that I've ever met who was not narcissistic or not self-absorbed.
So fast forward, when did you start seeing things happening that you were like, "Wait a minute, what's going on here?"
Oh, as the first thing was when I heard about sports, girls' sports. I thought, "Oh my gosh, that's crazy." And then I had this dinner with this friend of mine and this other friend who is still semi-trans maiden. So the first friend the turf friend said, "Yeah, Pat, I'm a TERF." I said, "Okay, what's that?" And so she told me, "Okay, I am too." That makes and so she said, "Well, tell me what that's about." And that she explained, I said, "Oh, that makes perfect sense to me." And then I was talking to my sister, and she said she got it in half a minute as well. She said, "Oh, that makes perfect sense. That's ridiculous." And she lives on the East Coast, and she's gone on protests as well. So I went to the WDI conference last September. That was the first time I ever really met other women who were TERFs.
Mhm.
And I had spent the summer just inhaling all these books about the subject. Yeah,
And
like
and you
Joyce, Joyce Helen Joyce's book, Trans. I thought that was really good.
that was an excellent book. I
Yeah.
really love the way she laid it out. Very it was very simple, but she did
Mhm.
cover everything, and she even covered some of the history, which I think was really important to do
Yeah.
in the capture.
She also made an interesting point. She said, I started look research and I wanted to be given have a really open mind. So I went and I read books that they've written
Mhm.
and it just turned her off more and more. So I don't know if she's ever met any trans trans guys who are not narcissistic either.
Oh, I'm sure she's met plenty of of interesting folks. Um, no, it's yeah, it's interesting. You call yourself a turf and you say turf like you're very proud of it, which is
Oh yeah, I'm
really much
fine
the
with it.
opposite. And there is still some women who don't like to use it because they're like, that's a slur.
I don't care. I
Why? Well, okay, so why do you use
doesn't
it?
bother me. I mean, because I grew up with bullies. I went to I went to Catholic schools, and I had crazy nuns, and I grew up with bullies, and so if a bully is going to say some word to me they think is insulting, I screw 'em, I'm just gonna claim the
Yeah.
word as my own.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really about reclaiming as well, you
Yeah, so
know?
I
I'm
just
like,
claim it
"Oh,"
as my own.
or just like, "So? What does that
Yeah,
even mean?" You
and
know?
also it upsets them, and that's also a good thing if you can upset them, right? Because you're taking it. Because when we reclaim it, we take it away from them, and so
Yeah,
that upsets them. So
you
that's
take
another good thing.
you take the power out of it.
Yeah.
So what kind of activism have you done now since you well, how long have you been active doing
Oh,
this kind of stuff?
I can't say I've been active probably since, last September.
Okay.
Um, but I started to get really active in, um, in January because I joined a group and we do different things. So I was working with Erin Friday's group. Erin Friday, um, she has, she runs uh, our duty, and she was trying to get a law passed in California that will do three things. It's called Protect Kids California, and the law will do three things. It will make sports, locker rooms, and I'm sure you know all about this law, but anyway, I'll
Yeah.
say it because for the sake of the interview.
Yeah.
But it makes sports same sex. It also means boys cannot go into girls or women's locker rooms or their changing rooms. Sports have to be same sex. Parents must be notified if the child is masquerading as the opposite sex. And um, and let's yeah, and
Oh, it
uh,
also the third thing is it would ban transition
yeah, it
surgery.
bans the surgeries.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had something in my throat. So anyway, yeah, it bans the wrong sex surgeries. And when I so we went to all sorts of interesting places that I would normally never go to. We went to gun shows,
Mhm.
and we went to there's a woman in the group who's a very devout Catholic. She's the nicest woman in the world, and she got her church behind it. So I went out with her to her church, and we were collecting signatures in front of her church early in the morning, like around Easter, and we were just getting a lot of people, and we met people who is like they s- they really support us, and so our theory, and the theory that other people have is that people in California really do support this. Actually, according to the polls that our our duty that the Protect Kids California group did, they most Californians overwhelmingly support this.
Yeah.
And it would be wonderful if we could get this onto the 2026 ballot. We didn't don't have enough for 2024, so we had to extend the deadline. But I think like even in San Francisco is supposed to be very woke. It's really not as woke as a lot of other areas.
Okay. That's
It's
interesting.
yeah, it's really not. There are 30,000 conservatives who live in San Francisco, I found,
Hmm.
which is I thought is interesting.
Have
Uh,
you yourself been pretty much a liberal or a Democrat?
yeah, I've always been a Democrat, but for um, the last election, just because I got so pissed, I registered Republican so that I could vote for the Republican opponents
Mm.
because I'm just so fed up with our
Yeah.
Democratic leadership. I'm definitely not going to vote for Trump. No way.
I'm with you.
But I did that because that was for the primary.
Yeah.
I'm also going to start work with a group called, uh, it's DIAG, Democrats for an Informed Approach to Gender.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to be doing work with them. I'm going to be retiring pretty soon, so I have more time to do work with them.
Oh, great. I'll probably see
Yeah.
you over there.
Oh, really? You're part of them? Oh, wonderful. Okay,
I mean,
great.
I help out as much as I can.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really good group. I do really enjoy what they're doing so far, and I'm glad they exist
Mhm,
because that's been such a frustrating thing for me as a
mhm.
life. Since I could vote, I voted Democrat, and I
Yeah,
would
I've always
consider
voted
myself
Democrat.
a liberal, and it's just
Yeah.
like these are not these are not my values at all. This is
No. A lot of and I have friends who are still very, they're still very they're still devout Democrats, and I say, Biden is gonna lose because of this issue." "Oh, no, everyone doesn't know. Biden is gonna lose because of this issue, and Democrats need to wake up."
yeah. No, definitely. I mean, I don't know if you listened to the last space they had where they interviewed Kara Dansky about her new book.
Oh, I didn't get to do that, but
Yeah,
what
it's
yeah,
it's
her
on.
book is good. I've read her book. I have
Yeah,
her
well,
book.
I think she has 2 now. This is her
Yeah, she does.
newest
Yeah.
one. I haven't read the newest one, but I did read the last one. I really enjoyed it, and I've spoken to her, and I've actually met her in person. We did an
Oh, really?
action
Yeah.
together.
Oh, great.
I think it's might have been 2 years ago now. It was when there was this California state championship going on for the high schools in
Uh-huh.
track and field.
Mhm.
And so they would go around California to different cities and have,
Mhm.
different the events for the state finals or the state
Yeah.
championships. And one of them was in my neck of the woods. And so I went out and we went into the stands and we hid our banners and our signs and we waited till because there was two boys running in the girls division.
Okay. Yeah.
And we waited to that last round when they were
Yeah?
all running, and then we all stood up, unfurled our banners, and was like, protect women's and girls' sports and, the whole 9
Great.
yards, and, videoed it all and promptly got kicked out, but we held the banner high the whole way out.
And what was the reaction of other people there who were attending this?
Most people just didn't just were, like, shocked, like, they didn't know what was going on,
Yeah.
and, but we had a few people who the thing that annoyed me most is I had what I assumed was a gay man get in my face and tell me I should be ashamed of myself.
Oh, yeah, see, lesbians have always been there for men, for gay men. We were there when they were having when the AIDS crisis hit, it was lesbians who were there helping them, and the gay community was the men they were all bowled over by this.
Mhm.
But they need to stand up for us.
They won't.
Yeah, I know, they won't.
Yeah, that was ooh, that made because the whole thing when we went to that was total nonviolence and don't say anything and don't argue with anybody, just hold the
Mhm,
signs, and then when you're told to leave, walk out,
mhm.
and that's it. And so we didn't say a word, but man, he made me mad. I really wanted to tell him, "Look, buddy,"
Yeah, yeah.
you know? Um, just yeah, but most people were just like, "What?"
But, you planted seeds. I mean, it's funny because the events that I've gone to, those old gun shows,
Mhm.
talking about World War II with the World War II guys. Yeah.
Yeah, I went and
"My
gathered some
father was
signatures.
in World War II. He flew over Europe." And people were just they'd come up, "Where can I sign?" But it's like they don't have the opportunity because our media doesn't really talk about our point of view, and then somebody out there sees us doing this, us saying something, even if this Protect Kids California petition doesn't make it to the ballot, we've planted seeds all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's what I've always kind of approached what I do as well,
Yeah.
like, talking about how this affects lesbians, talking about detransition, just talking about all that kinda
Mhm.
stuff. It's really about planting those seeds, and it's about offering the other side of the coin here, the other what's
Exactly,
the
yeah.
other perspective? Because right now, it's just like no other perspective is allowed to be talked about. We can't even have a
Mhm.
conversation, and to
No,
me,
you
that is
can't.
just fundamentally not progressive.
No,
You
it's
know?
not. It's definitely not. I mean, it used to be when, yeah, when I was 18, you were just a twinkle in your parents' eye. I was they were like Democrats and Republicans would have strong disagreements, but it but not to the point, not like what's going on now, and it's all about emotion. It's nothing is about facts. Let's look at honest facts. No, they're talking about, well, his feelings, and no, let's look at let's look at biology, let's look at facts. And they're
Well
not willing to do that, and they get all emotional, like, everything is all emotion.
well, the problem about worrying about somebody's feelings is everybody's gonna have feelings, and then you're gonna have to
Yeah,
pick whose feelings are more important.
yeah, it is.
That
It's
is not how
ridiculous.
you make laws. It's just
No,
not.
you don't. No, you don't make laws that way.
Um,
I have a good friend who moved here from Sacramento, and this our city government, she was get trying to get registered, and they kept calling her a "they," and
how
she
old is
wouldn't.
she?
Oh, well, there's only one of her. She's one person, and her
No,
name.
how old I know, but
Oh, how old is
how
she?
old
She's
is she?
60. She's 60, and
60
they
and
were
they're
calling
calling
her
her
a "they," and
oh
she
my
said,
gosh.
and she wouldn't let let 'em do it. She said, "No, I'm not a they, I'm a she." And she took up 3 weeks of this guy's time, and he finally got it through his head, "Oh, I better refer to her as a they, as a she."
How have you seen this impact lesbians through the years? When did you see this start to creep in?
Well, it was definitely creeping in the 80's and the 90's, just from my very limited experience with my little coven and this little community that our group had, and that was about it. After that, um, I just got really focused on my career, and I wasn't really very social. So, but, I would read about it, and it just seemed to be creeping in more and more with the pride events because everything was all about trans. And last year, I mean, you look at the movie festival, the film festival, it was all mostly trans stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw it start to creep in when I was like 21 actually. So
Yeah,
2001 or so it
yeah,
was just suddenly there. It's just
yeah.
suddenly like all my it seemed like
Oh,
so
yeah.
many of my butch lesbian
Mhm.
friends started to identify as trans men. And I'm
Yeah,
like, what is this?"
because they weren't able to go to the Michigan Women's Festival.
Well, I didn't either.
Yeah,
Uh
I know. I've never been either. I've never been camping a day in my life, so
but yeah, so it's I didn't know if you had any experience with, seeing that kind of trickle in. But it doesn't sound like you were super active in like lesbian community up through the years. You kind of
no,
did your
I
own
got
thing.
more involved with animal rights.
Okay.
I mean, so I was just focused on that, and one problem with the animal rights movement is that they're very entrenched with this
I was
cult.
I was gonna say,
The
did you see it creep into the animal rights
Yes,
movement?
it's in the animal rights community.
When did you see that start to happen about?
When I saw those little Franken flags at a booth for the San Francisco Veg Society last year, I
Mm,
thought, "Okay, what do you have to do with trans rights? You're a veg society."
yeah.
But they totally support it, and no one dares to say anything because people who are in animal rights, they tend to be very liberal. You're not gonna find a lot of Republicans
No.
in animal rights community.
Um, have you lost any family or friends over your position on this?
No.
No.
No, I don't have that much family left. I have, let's see, probably there'll be a couple of friends I know. The minute they find Facebook friends, the minute they find out, but somehow it just doesn't bother me. Um, my sister is like totally gets it,
Mhm.
and the people I really care about, totally get it.
I wonder if you kind of staying out of the LGBT
Yeah,
stuff helped you kind of, or didn't impact your perspective, right? Because you kind of stayed out of the group.
yeah, I stayed
So
out of it, and then when I saw it again, I thought, "Oh my god." I mean, it's like looking at somebody, they've been gradually getting sick, then all of a sudden there's a person who hasn't seen them in a while, and they see them, and it really hits them, but the people who are taking care of the sick person, they've gotten used to it.
Wow, that is an
So
excellent description.
when you haven't seen them in a few years and you see that, you're like, "Oh my god, it's so obvious."
Yeah. And what's the sickness you see?
The sickness I see is people they're accepting this without they're not thinking, they're accepting it blindly because they think that's the way we should be. They're not really thinking critically. It's this total absence of thinking critically, and they're not thinking critically. They're not really looking at, "Okay, why do we really support this? Don't you see?" And it just seems to me it's obvious when, like, say, girls' sports. I mean, that just seems so obvious. And but our newspaper here in San Francisco, it's a pretty lame newspaper, and it's always been lame, but it's gotten lamer over the years, and they totally drink up the cult,
Yeah.
and June is the worst month.
Oh, yes, that's coming.
June is
Brace
the
yourself.
absolute yes, it's the absolute worst month because they're totally parading it all over the place.
Yeah, do you know it's so funny when I'm out and about in stores and come across the whole pride splash happening
Yeah,
here with all the trans inclusive
yeah.
flag and stuff. Every time what the people I see look at it and go are usually always lesbians.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
so funny to see lesbians just, just regular lesbian couple walking by and go they look at it and they just go, "Ugh," like Jesus Christ.
Oh, yeah, there's so many gay groups. I wish more gay people would see through this. We have Gays Against Groomers, and in Britain, there's a group called LGB Alliance. I think they have branches here,
Yeah,
but
there's
that's it.
LGB Alliance US. They're
Yeah.
I actually volunteer with them as well,
Oh,
and
okay.
they're actually quite separate from the UK. It's like name only. The
Oh, okay.
UK does their own thing, and we do ours. They're pretty
Okay.
active.
I
Well,
should
try to be.
try to get more involved with them.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely. So how do you see? You talked about the sickness, and I was wondering how do you see that in the gay community? What do you think this has done to, like, just gay people and or homosexuals, same-sex attracted people in the
it's
community?
you know what it is? It's like somehow people are being taught to have internalized homophobia all over again.
Mm,
They're being taught because we have internal like, people in the f like, early in the past, I mean, they had this internalized homophobia, and now we're getting her internalized homophobia all over again, and you cannot criticize it
and how so? What's the internalized
because
homophobia?
you can't say, "That's a man." You can't say I have a friend she's a lesbian, and she's a therapist. And she actually was said, "Oh, I'm so over the trans thing." I said, "Oh, great," because I was afraid she might have drunk the Kool-Aid, but she still has drunk the Kool-Aid because she seriously thinks that you can change sex. And she said and I said, "No, you can't. Look, we have XX chromosomes, YXY chromosomes. You cannot change that. You cannot alter a person's sex." "Oh, but I'm a psychologist, so I know. Yes, you can change sex, and people are born in the wrong body." And I didn't know what to say to that. I wish I had thought to say, "You're speaking as a psychologist. Think in terms of what a biologist would say." And if a biologist says this, they're immediately hammered as being, homophobic, or I mean, they're not homophobic, transphobic.
Yeah, yeah. See,
And places where people work, where they work. I mean, because they get all this all because all these large corporations, they toot it too, so people are afraid to speak up because they may lose their jobs.
yeah, the job stuff is serious. I know
Yeah,
women who've lost their lesbians who've lost their jobs,
yeah,
over just being lesbians, and
yeah,
there's where the major homophobia comes in for me, is telling telling gay people, and especially telling lesbians, that we have no right to be same sex attracted. We have no right to say, I will not have sex with a man, I will not date a man,
Mhm.
and I don't want a man in my spaces.
Yeah. I was invited to the, to the Dyke March last summer by this lesbian who should know better, but she's very woke,
Oh Lord, yeah.
and I said, "No, I'm not going." He said, "Why not? I'm not bisexual. Why would I wanna go there?" And she just got all baffled.
Now I'm so surprised at the gay people who don't see this, like the lesbians who don't
Yeah,
see
I don't
this.
get it. How can you not see this? How can
I
you
mean,
not see how homophobic this is? How lesbophobic this is? How can you not see that?
I don't understand. I mean, sometimes it is a definitely generational,
Mhm.
if you grew up with it more. But if you're even in my age range and
Yeah,
older, you've seen the before. You've seen the
yeah,
before and after. So like, how can you not see these things creep in and go, wait a minute, wait, time out, you know?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know how they. I think it's a subtle thing, and another thing is that a lot of these big, supposedly gay rights organizations like GLAD and oh, ACLU is another one. They're horrible. They get all this funding from pharmaceutical companies,
Yeah,
and
I
so
mean,
people,
it's all
yeah,
about the money.
yeah, it's all about the money. So people who've been big supporters of HRC and GLAD for all these years, well, Helen Joyce described it perfectly. She said, "These organizations have already accomplished what they needed to do for gay people. So now they have to have another cause or else they'll have all these people unemployed." And so they get all these donations. So they've completely sold the gay and lesbian community down the river.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was is there anything else you wanna talk about before we
Um,
close it out?
no, I think I've complained about everything I can think of. It's
Okay. Well, thank you for joining me. Thank you for telling me your
okay.
experience. Um, I really appreciate hearing, all the perspectives from lesbians of all age groups,
Oh, good. Yeah.
places, especially because you've been in San Francisco so long, right?
Yeah.
So it's also interesting that you saw so many of these things happening,
Yeah. And
much earlier than people think they
for
might have
women
been
and for
happening.
yeah,
Lesbians,
and
it really
yeah.
goes back to, like you said, we're supposed to be nice.
Yeah, we're all supposed to be nice.
Women are supposed to be nice, and
Yeah.
that's really got us in trouble.